that I find interesting that you may or may not. So originally I had thought to change the topic of the shiur in order to focus on the three kidnapped Israeli teenagers. My wife actually knows the aunt of one of them. She lives here in Brooklyn, in the Hay right now. And I ultimately thought better of it for a couple of reasons. Reason number one, because if we were to change the topic of the shiur every week in order to in honor of current events, the shiur would be the topic of the shiur would be current events through the lens of, I mean, there's a disaster pretty much every week. A plane went down in Ukraine last week. We have situations here. There were attacks. Kansas City was one example. I mean, there are a few other situations. It never ends, unfortunately. But that's not the point. Sabato actually made a very powerful point of this once, a few times in the Shiva, and that's that the answers to these situations we find in the Torah itself. We don't need necessarily to turn the world inside out or specifically to prepare a shiur on a given topic. I'd actually like to explain that. In other words, when I thought better of it and I decided that it would be much more both useful and informative for us to actually find in Sefer Mishel how exactly we can respond to certain situations and what the how prophets captured the complexity and the sophistication of these different situations and words that are worth gold. So clearly we have plenty of examples of all kinds of halachic dilemmas and conundra and complicated situations that deserve our time. No need to change the topic of the shiur. Maybe we'll skip a few chapters forward, but I'd like for you to see through the lens of Mishel how situations like this are complicated. I will talk a little bit in the second half of the shiur, the more halachic section about the halachot of Pidyon Shvuim. I didn't mean for the entire shiur to be on it, so I'm telling you now that if that does happen, it wasn't my intent. But if asked questions, I will pursue them and present my opinions and defend them. Feel free to do the same. I'm not here to hear myself speak. I'm here to share what I believe to be the ideals that the Torah would encourage us to follow. So we spoke last week, and yes, the Divrei Torah should definitely work towards the zechut of the freeing of the three captive boys, and perhaps to, and maybe even more importantly so, the spiritual enlightenment of the hearts, minds, and souls of the, we'll call them individuals, who make the important decisions in Israeli politics. There are other words that we can't use on camera. We'll use them in the break. So here we are in Sefer Mishel. We had discussed last week this concept of the mashal, of the parable, analogy, allegory, how it is that the prophets pass this information on, how they capture very abstract, lofty, spiritual concepts, and they make them a little bit easier for us to get a handle on. So we mentioned last week that these parables are all true on more than one level, and it's pretty much the limits of your imagination, your intelligence, your degree of sophistication that determine how far you can take in one of these given parables. So you can't take them literally and say God is just like my mother or just like my father. But the amount of spiritual material that you can draw from this well is pretty much infinite. We're going to fast forward to Perek Zayin because there's a particular mashal, there's a particular metaphor that I'd like you to appreciate because I think it does capture quite a bit of reality. And again, the beauty of this kind of study is that it's not just to talk about what happened in Israel or what happened here or what happened there. These are concepts that are true everywhere. They can be applied everywhere. There's no area of life, no aspect of human existence that these discussions won't enrich. That's the beauty of them. So I'm here in Perek Zayin in chapter 7. I don't mind the hammering. So in chapter 7, the psukim read like this. You'll forgive my translation. The translated version that I have is much heavier. I didn't have the cloth to carry. So there's a bit of repetition in Mishel in the sense that many of the chapters kind of follow the same patterns, where they begin with something along the lines of a warning, and the warning is kind of becomes more detailed, fleshed out a little bit, and there's a lesson to be learned, guarantees of what happens if you ignore the warning, and then what happens if you heed the warning. So it reads like this: My son, keep my sayings and my commandments hide within you. Guard my commandments and live, and my teachings, my Torot, ki'ishon einecha, like should be as precious to you as your eyes. Right? Familiar with this? That's in the Middle East anyway. It's a term of endearment to say that someone's your eyeballs. Or Arabic has a lot of this too. Your eyes are important to you. Tie these things on your fingers, like memory. That's not a new thing, by the way. People used to tie notes or strings on their fingers to remind themselves of certain things. So tie these things on your fingers, meaning remind yourself constantly of the mitzvot. Write them on the board of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, to the chokhmah. And you should call openly or make bina reveal itself to you, intuition perhaps. Why? Follow very carefully from this point. To save you from a foreign woman, from a strange female stranger, whose words are smooth.
For what?
Whose words are smooth. Or she smoothed, literally, like she greased her words. Okay? Follow the parable, the metaphor. From the window, in the window of my house, by the opening, I can see, and I look, and but Petayim literally means innocent or naive individuals. I understand children, youngsters lacking, who aren't paying attention. Chasar lev literally means you're not giving your heart to something, but it implies that you're not paying attention. These are the targets of this woman. One who goes through the market towards her corner, and towards her house he walks. In the evening, towards the night, the end of the day, in the darkness of night, when all is black. And behold, there is a woman coming towards him, a harlot, a prostitute, unsurat lev. Her heart is guarded, as if to say she's not going to give you her heart. That's not what she's in the business of selling. She makes, I guess, pleasant sounds, and is rebellious. In her house, her feet do not reside, meaning she's constantly walking around. We're just entirely erased. But sometimes outside, sometimes in the streets, and she hides out, like she stakes out, as if to say she's hunting on every corner. And she'll hold him, she'll kiss him. She brazenly, with a brazen face, she says to him, I just brought a shalamim sacrifice. Today I fulfilled my obligation. I fulfilled my neder, my promise. That's why I came out towards you, in order to welcome your face. And here I found you. And I've made very pleasant bedding on my bed. It's all made from the finest flax of Egypt, and I sifted over my bed myrrh and spices and cinnamon. Let's go enjoy ourselves over there until the morning. Let's gorge ourselves on love. For the man is not home, meaning her husband is not at home. He went on a distant voyage. He took his money with him. The day that for the unknown day in which he comes home. So she entices this man with her speech, with her discourse.
Which chapter is this about?
Chapter 7. The smoothness of her lips, she causes him to detour, to divert. And one who goes after her, he will find himself as if going to slaughter, and he will find himself shocked by the rebuke that will follow. Like his own actions will shock him by what's going to happen, until an arrow hits him right in the liver, like a bird falling into a trap, and he won't know that his own soul has been taken. That's the entirety of the chapter. A little bit wordy, we would think, but the point that Shlomo Melech is trying to get across is that the simplest level of understanding the parable is that there are women in this world who are trying to seduce or entice young men or naive men or innocent ones. We'll give the politicians a break tonight. They try to attract their attention with smooth words. They try to entice and to seduce and to relax and to encourage. Why don't you come over here? Wouldn't it be great? Look, I have nice clothing, I have nice bedding, perfumes, all things that are pleasant, etc. And in effect, this woman is leading him to a situation in which he's likely going to get caught, humiliated, perhaps even killed. Okay, so I could have summed up the entire chapter: don't solicit prostitutes. It's a bad idea. It's embarrassing, humiliating, the jealousy, the rage, the envy. It's ultimately going to destroy you. That's the simplest, most basic level that you could possibly understand this on, because you'll be making comparisons to things that we've experienced, that we know, how people try to attract each other, what's considered attractive, what's not, who's considered attractive, who's not, etc. Some interesting details to note, and that's that it seems like even the prostitutes of the time brought sacrifices. That's pretty frum. That's like observant for a prostitute. I mean, you would think if she's working as a prostitute, you may as well, forgive the expression, but let your hair down and then go all out. It's not like bringing sacrifices is going to help you. So it's nice that she's kind of observant. Maybe she's a bit conflicted. She might have grown up in a semi-observant home. Maybe she's traditional. Who knows? But at some point or another, she seems to have made a couple of mistakes. It's nice nonetheless that she has this respect for the concept of sacrifice. In fact, she says something and she promises, right? She says, I just fulfilled my neder, I fulfilled my vow today. I promised I was going to bring a sacrifice. And there I just did. In fact...
Or maybe it's just an appearance to entice the other party in the discussion to think that what they're doing is not wrong. How can a person that does a sacrifice or fulfills an neder can actually do something wrong? So it's not such a big deal.
Ask me in the second half of the class about relying on people for kashrut. Yeah. Well, her skirt wasn't so long, but she seemed like she knew what she was talking about. Yeah.
Or you could sort of make an analogy to someone that sort of sells his soul to some sort of business. The person that he works for would be like, oh, I give charity, I do this. That sounds like
We talked last week about this concept of I believe it came up, I don't remember which context, about accepting donations from people who have very questionable business relationships or who work in very questionable industries. So yes, we should add prostitutes to that category. So simple level number one, and I'm just going to flag some of these milestones out. Simple level number one: don't go to prostitutes, waste of time and money, and it's a bad habit. In the end, you'll get caught, and if you're lucky, you'll only get humiliated and probably get killed. Seems like she's married. Fair enough. Level number two, it's interesting to note that compared to what one might have thought, this woman not only brings sacrifices, she's actually offering the theoretical, the hypothetical individual in question some of these shalamim. Now, I don't know how much you know about korbanot shalamim. We should all know everything about korban shalamim, but one thing, and without letting Mike just embarrass everybody here by telling us, the whole story, as opposed to other forms of korbanot, say for example the olah is burnt in its entirety on the mizbeach, right? Ishay, it's referred to in the Torah like a fire. It's a flame. It's the whole thing is burned up. You don't get to eat anything from it. Korban shalamim, on the other hand, is a qurban you're allowed to eat from. In fact, you're obligated to eat from it. Not only are you obligated to eat from it, whatever's left after however long you have to eat it, generally a night and 2 days, day, night, day, needs to be burned. And there's a serious question as to whether or not you violated anything by leaving the meat out, or if you just burn it and you, resolve the problem that way. So it's not just that Our Lady of the immodest dress brought a sacrifice, but she brought a sacrifice that she practically has a mitzvah to share with other people. It's consumed with bread, probably with wine. In other words, she brings a korban. This is a seudat mitzvah, man. Come on. I'm not talking about, picking up one of these Russian brides that you find on your and whatever. Here we're talking about, she's an observant, she seems like an observant girl, right? Okay, so again, she went a little heavy on the makeup, but, she brings her korbanot, she carries it out nidarim. You're asking me to turn down a mitzvah? What kind of person, what kind of Jew would pass up the opportunity to share in a seudat mitzvah? She brought a sacrifice. This is like, meat doesn't get any more kosher than this. So she's offering me something pretty compelling. It's really hard to walk past the opportunity to share from a korban. And she's the hostess with the mostess. She wants to share lots of things, but I'll stay for the meal. The rest I'll skip dessert. But at least it's a korban, it's a mitzvah. I don't see why I shouldn't indulge. So the concept, the harlot, the prostitute, appears in many of the chapters of Mishel. It's actually one of the most prominently featured metaphors, if you will, in the entire Sefer. And there's a reason for this. There's a very, very important reason for this. We'll take a few notes from the Zohar HaKadosh. There is in Olam Hazeh no such thing as someone sinning by force. In other words, we wouldn't define something that you did wrong but by force as a pure avirah. So if I choose to violate Shabbat, for example, can't help myself, I gotta get at that cigarette. No one put a gun to my head and said smoke. I might have an addiction, which is also probably my fault, but no one threatened me, no one pushed me, no one, just have an appetite. I have a desire to fulfill, and I fulfill my desire by smoking a cigarette, maybe by eating non-kosher food, by going to inappropriate places, by running into women like this. There's no such thing as a chet, as an avon, as an avirah that's done by force. As a matter of fact, if someone were to put a gun to my head and say, bow down to the cross or I'm going to kill you, because you're under the threat of death, we don't even punish for situations like this. Meaning, yes, technically the right thing to do is to say, I refuse. If I can kill the guy, great. If I can't, I can try. Even that doesn't work. What am I going to do? Is going to pull a trigger. But if I had two witnesses there who were to warn me and say, don't bow down to that idol, Rabbi, because that's Avodah Zarah, you'd be punished with Sekirah. Even if I were to say, I know and I don't care, we still don't execute individuals who are warned under such circumstances, because we consider it to have happened under some kind of duress, under some kind of force. As a result, it doesn't qualify as a genuine avirah. It qualifies as something you did when you were threatened with death. In other words, you weren't really capable of transgressing a genuine avirah when this opportunity presented itself. So the point is that anything that we define as sin, as an avirah, is always something that you do voluntarily. You do it willingly. If I choose to eat non-kosher, it's because I feel like it. Okay, the Torah doesn't accept peer pressure as a mitigating circumstance. If I choose to lie or to cheat or to steal, I'm only doing it because I want to, because I feel like it. And so says the Zohar. So what's the point behind this prostitute concept? The prostitute concept represents, on a much more abstract level, not specifically women trying to seduce men, Yetzer Hara, or at least this particular form of Yetzer Hara, and how it operates in this world. And it operates by way of seduction. So anybody can identify a woman who's inappropriately dressed, the world's full of them. But the concept of, something looking appealing and enticing, it speaks to certain appetites and certain desires that people kind of instinctively have. And this is how Yetzer Hara doesn't force you to do avirot. It doesn't force you to make terrible mistakes. What does Yetzer Hara do? It tries to convince you to want to make the mistake. Yetzer Hara's job is to force you, to push you as far as it can, only for the purpose of making you not only commit the error, but to desire to commit the error, to want to commit the error. I will take money out of my pocket. I'll make reservations at that non-kosher restaurant. I'm going to say that thing that I'm not supposed to say, do whatever it is that I'm supposed to do, not because I'm being forced, not because I'm being pushed or because I'm being pulled, but because my appetite has been ignited. Something's gotten into me and I feel like this is a desire. This is what I want to do. Right? So, to go back to where we started, because it's going to sound funny if you just walked in, we haven't heard, at least not in recent history, of a prostitute forcing her services on anyone. That's not what Shlomo Melech is talking about. I'm sure it's what Elliot Spitzer would have claimed, but it's not what happened. I'm sorry, did I mention politics? He is a politician, so we should forgive him, because it's okay for politicians to do stuff like that. So, what exactly, how would that work? In other words, if the definition of, and this is the example that we brought from Mishel, prostitute is a woman who makes her living by, yes, maybe ensnaring, kind of trapping, but she traps you with your desires and your appetites. There's no force. She doesn't carry a gun. At least that's not how she musters up business. I don't think it's good for marketing. So, her job is to make you want to do something wrong. And that's the crucial point, and why this appears so frequently throughout Mishel. Because these things don't happen, first of all, by accident. Right? Oh, look at that, she's not my wife. How about that? I didn't realize. Oh no, you look just like her. It doesn't happen by accident. It only happens intentionally. So how do things intentionally happen? Someone manages to convince you to want something, to desire something, to do something. And then once you have this desire, all kinds of crazy things happen. What kind of crazy things happen? So I'm walking down the street and I smell this incredible smell of a korban shlamim. This is like Gilat, Halak, Bet Yosef. This is mitzvah meat. Someone has brought a kosher sacrifice, it's a mitzvah for me to partake in this meal. All of a sudden, I see mitzvot. Isn't that weird? I mean, isn't that what you think of every time your Yetzer Hara flares up? Like, wow, I'm so hungry. Look at that non-kosher restaurant. I feel like giving tzedakah. Let's go give money to someone. It doesn't work that way. You have an appetite for something, usually where your heart takes you, and then your mind starts to go to work, right? You were there this past Shabbat. I hope you were anyway, for Rav Lemel's speech about the Meraglim. Classic example the Gemara gives. Why is it that Megillat Eicha, the pei comes before the ayin 3 times out of the 5? Very specifically because these Rashaim, these evil spies, what did they do? Hiklimu pe la'ayin. They decided what they wanted to say, and then they saw the evidence they were looking for in order to present it to everyone else, and make them what? Because we're not that far from what we just mentioned. What do they want to make the entire nation do? Because he hit the nail right on the head. Right on the head. What did the Meraglim cause the nation to do? Not want to go. Up until now, they wanted to go, and now they no longer want to go. That's a huge difference. Why did they get punished? Because they weren't in Israel. Well, how are they supposed to get there? They had to get there. Why did they not get to Israel? The only thing that changed wasn't their location, wasn't their physical location. It was their desire to go. So to go to Israel, see what you see, come back, say what you say is one thing. But to change the desires, to change the wishes of an entire nation, and make them not want to go anymore, that was horrible. That was absolutely horrible. I mean, the entire generation had to die. None of them, with maybe a small handful of exceptions, could be salvaged. They all had to go. Why? Because their hearts were seduced into not wanting the right thing. And then bizarrely enough, what happens when you don't want the right thing? What's the nation's next best idea? Better than going to Israel, what should we really do?
Go to Mitzrayim.
We should go back to Egypt. I mean, we could have just stayed here and played pinochle. You know, could have spread some checkers and chess. No. Not only do we not want to go to Israel, we actually want the worst possible thing in the world. This was the worst place in the world, the worst culture in the world. We want to go back. Remember we spoke about this. This was the culture that permitted gay marriage at the beginning of the end. Chazal said for the entire Egyptian culture. Now that we don't want to go to Israel, it's not that we have no desires. It's not that our heart is empty of wishes. It's not that there's nothing on our minds right now. I had a wish list, I deleted it all. I'm saving nothing for later in Amazon terminology. I actually do have something that I want, and it's the exact opposite of what I'm supposed to want. So this is a double avirah. It's not just that we're not going to go to Israel. We don't want to go to Israel. Where are we going to go? The worst possible place. So it's, if you will, I don't want the right thing, and I definitely do want the wrong thing, which probably explains the severity of the punishment. We had worshipped the golden calf, right? Chet HaEgel came and went, 3,000 people died. Now you're talking about upwards of 1.5 million, maybe 2 million people. Well, we counted everyone above 20. It was 600, 3,000 and change, about the Nevi'im, etc., 611, 612. You're talking about, if the women were included, probably closer to 1.5 million, 2 million people. And we're incorrigible, there was no going back. So, a simple, ordinary, let's say, street-level prostitute might be one who tries to seduce or entice someone by looking good, by dressing nicely, putting on perfume, etc. The woman in question here in chapter 7 is trying to seduce you with mitzvot. It's like a high-end spiritual prostitute. So she's trying to attract you with mitzvot. That's bizarre. It doesn't really make that much sense. I mean, don't know how a business like that would function, but yeah.
Maybe it's the way that a mind works when you're about to do another job. Like you sort of rationalize yourself, rationalize your behavior, and you're saying, well, this is good.
Right.
So, like, it's okay.
Really, it's a mitzvah.
It's really a mitzvah.
It's a mitzvah. How could you say no? So I have a similar mitzvah. And poor thing, her husband's not home. I mean, she must be scared. Maybe I should help her. Maybe she's looking for help. Try to rationalize that. And this becomes a mitzvah. This becomes the right thing to do. It becomes the honorable thing to do or the sensible thing to do. Like what Jew in his right mind wouldn't stop by for a quick seudat mitzvah? And so here is level number 3, if you will, of sophistication. And that is that there's a very banal Yetzer Hara that afflicts probably most people in the world, where you're just enticed to do something wrong and you do it. And you know it's wrong, but you don't care. Or you don't care enough. You don't care enough to stop it. Maybe you're lacking certain basic tools, like how do you stop yourself when your desires get the better of you? How do you stop being angry? How do you stop being jealous? How do you stop being vengeful? How do you stop being hungry? So there are tools. I mean, there are things that we can discuss. There are ways to kind of get, your brain back in control over your body. But here, we're not talking about, oh, that pork looks so good, or I can't wait to pray to this idol, or whatever other avirah you might be doing, and whatever tickles your fancy on any particular day. Here we're talking about mitzvot. So there's a very powerful tool of Yetzer Hara, and that is that Yetzer Hara can promise you mitzvot, except these mitzvot come at the expense of other mitzvot. That's the really tricky part. That's where it becomes very, very difficult, right? Very nuanced when it comes to decision making, because when you have to decide between a mitzvah and avirah, this is little ease. Come on, what do you mean you want to go to bed? Get up, put on tefillin, pray with the minyan. There's a shiur going on. Yeah, you could stay home and you can cook and clean and enjoy yourself, but you want to go learn, you're going to have to get up and move. So I can choose between spiritual and physical. I can choose between good and bad. That's great. I can spend the money on a crazy evening at a restaurant, or I can give it to tzedakah. Right? These are no-brainer questions, and we still make mistakes at that level. But when it comes between two mitzvot, it becomes much, much harder. It requires a much more sophisticated perspective to be able to say that mitzvah looks enticing, but it's going to come at the expense of something potentially more important, or more immediate, or more necessary. So if I have to choose between going to this wedding or that one, I have a dilemma. I mean, it's not a bad dilemma to have, all things considered, but someone's going to be upset. I mean, they went to the trouble of inviting me to the wedding. They probably wanted me to be there, otherwise they might not have invited me. And these two weddings are happening at the same time. There's only one place I can be, so hey, what are you going to do? I can decide to go to one, I can decide to go to the other, I can go to neither of them, and then everybody gets mad. But those are difficult situations in which you have to make decisions. What about a wedding and a funeral? Do you go here or do you go there? Maybe it depends who you know better, maybe it depends who you're closer to, but decisions are a little bit difficult. Now, right, in order to make sure that everybody is involved and happy, what happens in a situation like the one that we have in Israel? It's a mitzvah to save captives, right? Sure. Huge. Absolutely. You can sell a Sefer Torah. You can sell your home. You can collect tzedakah. We can take tzedakah funds that were appropriated to one thing and reappropriate them to something else. In fact, unless we'd actually started building a Beit Knesset, we could take the funds that had been appropriated for that and use them to free the captives. What happens if freeing the captives comes at a price? Come on, it's always the right thing to do, isn't it?
What's the price?
Is there ever a wrong time to free a captive, or is there ever too high a price to free a captive? I hate to scorch your politically correct sensibilities. We have a real problem on our hands. This is not an easy question to answer. The answer is not always going to be yes. The answer is not always going to be at all costs. The answer is not always going to be release 1,000 terrorists. Halakha doesn't hold this way. And I feel terrible for the families. I feel terrible for the boys. God forbid. You wouldn't want it to be you, anyone you know. Chas v'shalom, bar minam. But there comes a time where decisions have to be made. And decisions have to be made by people with level heads. And people who know how to make these very fine distinctions between good and bad, and good and better, right and wrong, and righter and wronger, and it's not always going to make everyone happy. You see, political correctness doesn't really figure in to halachic, serious, responsible, spiritual decision making. So people are tempted to say, come on, at all costs, you know, they're a part of us, part of the family, we have to free them, we have to do whatever it takes. And I hear that, but I only hear it up to a certain limit. Okay? I may or may not have shared with you the story of Maharam Rothenburg. You may have heard this before. If you haven't, a quick summary of the story. Maharam Rothenburg lived in the late 12th, early 13th century in Germany. And he was, at the time, the Kaiser was waging war. If you're familiar a little bit with European history, most of the countries that you know today were constantly warring duchies and city-states and fiefdoms and what have you. So Germany didn't confederate until, like everyone else, in the late 1840s. Through the 1870s, you had movements like this, or Italy, France to a certain extent, a little bit earlier, but Germany for sure, and a few other countries around the same time. So Kaiser decided that in order to sponsor his wars, he's going to need to raise money somehow. So commonly the state would borrow money from Jews and then not pay them back. They would make loans from Jewish individuals or institutions and then renege on them. When the taxes became confiscatory in Germany, right? Imagine that. People used to leave countries because the taxes were too high. The tax rates in Germany became confiscatory. This is in days before socialism, so there must have been a good use for the money. They decided that because the taxes were higher on Jews than they were on anyone else, Maharam Rothenburg said it's impossible to make a living here, and he decided to get up and to leave. And so he left at the same time as his main disciple, the Rosh, also from Germany, except that the Rosh made it across the border, ended up, I believe he traveled through, I don't remember exactly if it was through what might have modern day Switzerland or if it was through France, but into Spain. That's where he made his home the rest of his life. The Maharam Rothenburg, the Meir, was captured at the border, and it didn't take long before the the Kaiser, Mishel Zichro, realized who he had captured, and he decided, hey, this is great. In order for us to sponsor the war effort, we're going to hold this rabbi for an exorbitant ransom. So they held him in prison, in solitary confinement, no less, in a tower. And the Jewish community was in shock. They didn't know what to do. In the end, they said, Tov, this is the greatest halachic authority alive in Europe. And people sold their farms, they sold their homes, they sold their assets, whatever they could to raise this ridiculous amount of money in order to free Rabbi Meir. And they came to the jail with the money in a sack, and they said, here's the amount of money that you requested, we'd like him set free. As they go up to release him from his prison, he asked the representative of the Jewish communities how they freed him, and so he said, oh, don't ask, they asked for this crazy ransom, and we had no choice but to come up with it. So he said, how much money did they ask for? He told us, an obscene amount of money. It's like worse than the U.S. national deficit. And he said, because they're never paying that back either. So Rabbi Meir heard this, he was shocked. And he said, so my sincerest apologies, I'm going back upstairs. I said, what do you mean? How's that possible? He said, no, you don't understand. This is impossible. If I allow this to become a precedent, if I allow this to be the first of what's going to be inevitably many more kidnappings and high-profile kidnappings, the Jewish communities are never going to live in peace again. They will be tormented and tortured. People will be kidnapped and held captive and held for ransom, and this will only get worse and worse and quickly. And don't tell me he didn't mean it. He died in prison. He spent the rest of his life in prison. He refused to leave. The community managed for a much smaller amount of money to give him some paper and some quills. He wrote halachic responses back and forth. In fact, if you look through Shut Maharan Rotenbrook, you wrote an entire collection of halachic responses, you'll find very often that he'll say something like, here's what I recall, but the book isn't in front of me. I don't know exactly how to, and I don't know if this quote is accurate. I mean, he photographic memory, so his mistakes are better than what we say with a book in front of us today. But he spent the rest of his life in prison. He never left. So this is one example of an infinite number.
He decided about himself. He took away the fear of Gideon Shmuel from other people. He was mochel on his own thing. It doesn't mean that we don't have to do for the kids.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
So let me ask you a question. Okay. I hear that you're distraught, and I share your distress. Okay. What limits are there? What potential limits are there to Gideon Shmuel, to saving captives? Like how far will we go? Can we exchange? Can we give him 3 other people for these 3? Talking about Jews. Well, it's a legitimate fair question, right? How about this? How about this?
Common sense.
Can we kill people in order to get them back?
No.
No? Can I say, look, you want those 3 let me just kill 3 other Jews, and you'll take them instead?
No.
Does that sound right? No. So clearly, pikuach nefesh is not going to be transgressed or violated in order to save them. In other words, who's going to say that this person is more valuable than that one, or that I should kill this one and free that one, or incarcerate this one and keep that one, right? You're with me. Okay? Up until this point, we're friends.
Okay.
What happens if releasing terrorists endangers the lives not just of 3 people, not of 3 million people, but of about 6 million people who live in Israel, and potentially Jews in other communities too? Do I have the right? I'm not even asking about the obligation. Do I have the halachic right? Am I within my halachic rights to endanger other people in order to save these 3? Now, I hear their plight. It's a terrible situation to be in. I'm not about to endanger the entire Jewish population of Israel to save 1 or 2 or 3 or 300, even 3,000 people.
So fine.
No offense to anyone, and I don't want you.
What's Gideon Shmuel there?
Well, Gideon Shmuel is when you're trying to save someone who's held in captive. Okay, the halacha becomes a little bit. The definition has just become a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more complicated. Okay, yes, we save captives. Absolutely. What's a captive? We're on a trip and someone got kidnapped or someone got mugged and is being held somewhere for a ransom. If it's a one-time situation, Like, it'll happen now, we'll just free the guy, fly back home, won't have to deal with it anymore. Maybe this is a situation worth looking into. If it's the kind of thing that's going to happen on a larger scale, or if it's the kind of thing that's inevitably going to risk other people's lives, going to endanger other people's lives, I ask you, what halachic right, not obligation, what halachic right do you have to make my kids go to school and come back with another 1,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 terrorists on the streets? And don't tell me these are innocent people that are being held in prison. Don't tell me these are people, these like Arabs that did nothing that are being held in jail. Huh?
It's a sure for me.
What's sure for
me?
me?
Release the 3 kids, the 3 kids are probably gonna get killed or die there. If you release in exchange of 1,000, the 1,000 might do something.
Well, and so here comes the question. Vadai b'shemek. You familiar with this halachic axiom?
Okay.
When you have a certain situation and you have an uncertain situation, right? Typically we favor the certain situation.
Okay.
Why does your logic only go one way?
Are you not sure?
Your halachic certitude is that these boys are going to die, and maybe we can release lots of terrorists, and then pray for good luck, that they're not going to attack any more people. Maybe they'll reform themselves. Maybe these terrorists... In fact, we're giving them an incentive to feel bad over what they did because they get to go free now, right? Like, that's discouraging as a terrorist. If I blew someone up, or stabbed or killed someone, went to jail and got released early because someone else did more terror, someone else committed another act of terrorism, this is I'm a career changer. I'm going to reconsider my choice of career and maybe start learning early childhood education.
If it was your son, you would say the same thing. If
Well,
it was your son and Bibi would come to you
I don't think, I wouldn't believe a word Bibi says to anyone on anything. Even economics, and he studied that. So I hate to disappoint you.
You know what I'm
I
saying?
hate to disappoint you, but the guy has lied only 5 million times in the last half hour. So, no, I don't believe a word that comes out of his
Still
mouth.
not as bad as Ian Balak. But
In fact, I would go so far as to call him a politician if I didn't want to offend people's sensibilities. But the reality of the situation is that the boys are currently suspected of being alive. And we don't know what's going to happen with them in the future. In other words, you're saying, oh, it's a sure thing, they're going to kill them. I don't know sure they're going to kill them. Maybe they're going to hold on to them until they can get something good in return. And then if you free them, you're freeing people who have, like, let's say chazakah. You know what a chazakah? It's like, it's established that someone who has 3 or 4 counts of actions of terrorism against him on his record, it's a pretty certain thing he's going to do it again. I mean, they arrested him, they put him in jail, there's a reason for it. So if anything, I'm more convinced that the terrorists who've been freed, and there are statistics on this, because they get picked up a second time too. 70-something% of all these people, that's almost as bad as child molesters. Incorrigible. 70+% of the people, I mean, that's all they know. That's all they study. They go to school, they get training, you know, they get ranked, they get a salary, they get benefits, they unionize. That's all these people know. What makes you think it's even a doubt that they're going to go back into terrorism? I'll make a point that's going to make you even less comfortable. And I'm sorry, it's your apartment and all, but the reality of the matter is, you're only encouraging these people by negotiating with them. In other words, you're calling Maharam Mirotenburg a Hasid. You're saying what he did was an act of extreme piety, where really the community had an obligation to free him, and he released them of the obligation as if he has the right to do such a thing, which is interesting. Because when it comes to tzedakah, if you need the help, you need the help. If I know that a family is poor and the father refuses to accept tzedakah because of his pride, we'll still give him the money. He refuses to take it and his wife and kids are starving. If need be, we'll beat him up or we'll put him in prison. There's no reason for him to be able to prevent the family from getting what it is that they need. You're saying that Maharam Rotenburg made his decision because he was a pious man and because halacha gives him the choice of whether or not he wants to be set free. Whereas his response was, what I'm doing now is pikuach nefesh. I'm right now, by refusing to leave prison, I'm right now saving the lives, not of 1, not of 1,000, but of millions and millions of Jews who will constantly be tortured and harassed and taken captive and probably killed because the Goyim will have learned that there is a lucrative business to be had in holding Jews hostage. And that plays right directly to the point that I'm trying to make, which is, no offense, I will continue to pray, I'll continue to make my efforts. I will not, if I were the one making the decisions, but again, I'd make a lousy politician because I tell you the truth. I would under no circumstances endanger anyone's life, let alone the lives of the entire public, in order to secure the freedom of these boys, because unfortunately, there are consequences to these things. And don't tell me it hasn't happened in the past.
I agree.
Okay? Don't tell me that the people who are guilty of this, incidentally, you did hear the name, that Israel arrested a few Hamas terrorists, one of whom has a long rap sheet, has been involved in terror before too. So look at that. They were kidnapped by somebody who'd previously been released in some kind of a peace deal. Isn't that something? That's amazing. I thought it was peace. I thought we were negotiating for peace, actually. Like, we let the guy go and he was going to be peaceful. What
Let me
happened?
put other points in the balance, in the equation. I raised that point for, we had a discussion, I know we disagree. I would still vote for you if you run for elections, but you can't agree with
It's a
everything.
purely academic discussion.
Exactly. Here is the thing. The example is more valid with Gilad Shalit than with the free boys, but what about that? I'm a soldier.
Well, what's the difference? You illustrate for us the difference.
I'll get to the point, you'll understand why it's the difference. I'm a soldier, but those kids are not soldiers. I'm going to fight for Israel, and I know I have the entire country behind me. I know that I'm not going to take crazy risks, but I know that if I need to do something that is more gutsy, let's say that's worth it, I can try that, and I know that the country is backing me up. If I know that they're letting me rot in a cell if I get caught, maybe I just don't even want to go.
So what you're saying is like this. We have a pikuach nefesh argument, but of the opposite kind, where it's a question of soldier morale. If the soldiers are not going to be negotiated for at all exorbitant costs, and we're not going to turn the world inside out in order to free them, they're not going to want to fight. Well, let me tell you something. You know who's really upset about what's happening now in Iraq? Aside from all the Iraqi people who should hopefully be upset their country's in flames again. You know what's really upset about what's going on in Iraq? If you follow the news?
I didn't.
The American soldiers went to Iraq and tried really hard to Operation Democracy.
Oh yeah, it's not working, obviously.
Well, they worked really hard to set up a parliamentary government in which the Shia and the Sunni and the Kurdim get their political representation. And the parliamentary system was set up similarly to other constitutional democracies in the Western world, because Iraq is just like the rest of the Western world, right? Why not? And how many 5,000 plus American soldiers died? The effort itself cost almost $1 trillion. And in a matter of, wasn't even 2 days, was it? It was less than one. The Sunni insurgents came in from Syria with some money and some weapons, and they conquered Mosul and Tikrit on their way to Baghdad, which is now filling itself with mercenary Shiite soldiers from the south and from the east and Iran. And the whole place is about to go up in smoke. And now we have a contiguous war zone from Lebanon to the Persian Gulf. So an American soldier sees this and says, wow, don't tell me all those soldiers died for nothing. Don't tell me all that money was spent on nothing. Don't tell me that I gave up some of the best years of my life over what ended up being another war. Right? To give you a more personal example, I have a great uncle, my grandmother's youngest brother, who is an amputee. He lost both of his legs, one above the knee, one below the knee, at the Allenby Bridge between Yericho and Jordan. When Israel, during the Six-Day War, hadn't yet taken full control of the bridge. The Jordanians all of a sudden came up with ammunition they didn't realize they had, and they started shelling an Israeli military position right next to the Allenby Bridge, and so he lost his legs. How do you think, I can tell you how he felt, when Israel gave the Palestinian Authority full control of Yericho? Do you know how many of my friends died? He was like the only one who survived that shelling. Do you know how many of us, actually they thought he was dead. They heard him, they threw him in a pile of bodies, and someone heard him groaning. And they pulled him out, and they took him to the hospital. He was in the hospital for months. So how do you think he felt when they fought so hard to secure that position? They just gave it away. How do you think he feels every time a terrorist comes out of Yericho and attacks someone else in Israel? He's like, come on. You want to talk about morale? So morale would be we fight to secure the liberty and the security of the citizens of Israel. And I would be demoralized if I, as a soldier, instead of fighting for and even giving up my life for the nation's sovereignty, In other words, their right to make their own decisions regarding their own destiny and their own future, the nation's security and the nation's liberty is now being compromised because of me. Basically, I'm inhibiting their sovereignty, their liberty, their self-determination, etc. So the soldiers, and maybe we should be giving the soldiers a bit more of psychological preparation before or during their military training. Maybe we shouldn't take soldiers who are so young. Maybe between 18 and 20 we can, we'd do better even to shorten their service, but there's a lot of psychological maturity that happens between the ages of 18 and 20. A lot of this is recently coming to light. So the point that you're making is, soldier morale, which is a lot less hard science than some of the other aspects of the argument. But the point that I would make would be the contrary. I don't want to fight for a country that spends its soldiers like pawns on a chessboard. I don't want to fight for a country that one day makes us go to war, fight, get shot at, get killed, and taken captive, and then gives back everything that we gained in the war. Why would I go to war? In fact, what a lot of the people in Israel are calling for is a military victory. People have lost their patience with negotiations because the Arabs don't live up to anything they promise. And in fact, all it does is engender more terrorism because they perceive it as victories. And they're right. They're absolutely right about that. So maybe what they need is force. Maybe the time for negotiation is past. Look, I'm not going to go so far as to echo the thoughts of one of the conservative politicians in Israel who said instead of negotiating with them, we should kill a terrorist every hour they haven't given the boys back. It's like, instead of rewarding these people for doing what they've done, we should actually take the opposite stance and effectively put the screws to them that way. They probably want to kill the boys anyway. Negotiating the release of these three for 10,000 soldiers, because the price goes up every time, 10,000 militants, that is, terrorists, is probably not going to get us very far. Yeah.
But they don't value human life the way that we do. Like, they're blowing themselves up. I don't think by us killing them, like, it's a losing situation, because if we kill them, it's like for jihad. I don't think they would actually
helps them with the mitzvah. I thought you were going to take.
Because it's like they get their reward and all that.
They get virgins with Egyptian flax. Yeah. So I thought you were going to make a different argument, and that's that the commodities market argument. So if on the commodities market, one Jew trades for 1,000 Arabs, then I guess the Jews have a valuable currency, and the Arabs maybe don't see themselves as such. They agree to these terms, so they'll tell you they're negotiating out of strength, but really they're negotiating on our weakness. They know that we just can't take it, and that we'll constantly bombard the media with pictures and stories and discussions, and we'll just torture ourselves into giving in, when unfortunately it's going to cause more soldiers and more civilians to be kidnapped and killed. Exactly what's going to happen. This is where... What's that? I don't know. I haven't heard Gilad Shalit speak publicly since he was released. As a matter of fact, they brought him to YU, and he didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. I don't even think they brought him as a speaker. Didn't hear about this. It's like last year.
You brought him as one.
He came to YU. He didn't even talk. He just sat there. I don't know.
So I haven't.
I don't know. I'm sure it was not pleasant what he went through, and I'm sure it's going to haunt him for the rest of his life. I don't envy him, but we can't let... See, I don't think Gilad Shalit is the guy that I want making this decision for the entire nation. I will humbly submit that there are people who shouldn't be in the decision-making capacity. Gilad Shalit, and for that matter, Bibi Netanyahu, probably have no business making decisions on behalf of anybody except for themselves, because unfortunately their experiences and their track records are what they are. You can't take someone who's in that position and say he's going to teach the rest of the nation what life is really all about, because his perspective is very different from that of the level-headed decision maker who's supposed to say, it's a tough situation, but we have a tough call to make, and we're going to have to live with the consequences. By the way, you want examples from recent history? I owe you guys a break. We'll take one in a second. I remember, right, because this is only like 500 years ago, when I was in yeshiva, they had just... it was Ehud Barak had just unilaterally withdrawn Israeli forces from Lebanon, right? Now, Lebanon was a terrible place. In fact, it still is. It was overrun by Syria, and then there was the whole, again, Muslim-Catholic dispute. You had the Armenians were there. They're not Catholic, but they sympathized with the Christians. It was a small Catholic majority that was dominating the country. and you had a large Muslim Shiite minority that was being dominated, which, by the way, seems to be a theme in the Middle East. Like Iraq is also some 30% Sunni, but they, for some reason, run the country, and the Shiite majority doesn't. So, at any rate, that's maybe related to organization. When it comes to the situation in the north, I remember because I was there, I was living there at the time, not in the north. I was living in Spirit home. Ehud Barak patted himself on the back and said, "I'm going to do what no one else had the guts to do. I'm going to do something courageous. I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to capitulate to all the international pressures, and I'm going to withdraw all of our Israeli forces out of Lebanon. Don't tell me gradually. Don't tell me slowly." Right? He did it in a matter of like 3 hours. He withdrew all Israeli troops. In fact, they even left ammunition, first aid gear, uniforms and the like. They just abandoned it. Along with it, they abandoned the entire southern Lebanese army, i.e. the Christians that were fighting the Muslim terrorists from the north, the same Muslim terrorists who would love to have passed the Christians and come directly into Israel. And Ehud Barak was very proud of himself. This was the right thing to do. We lost too many soldiers over there. Well, guess what happened a few weeks later? Because the news isn't going to talk about this. It's not popular media material. It's got truth to it. They're allergic to that. 4 Israeli soldiers were kidnapped from an outpost right by Hardo, right, in the north of the country, along the Lebanon border. There was a jeep, an armored personnel carrier. They fired a handheld rocket at it. They blew it up and knocked it off. They took the soldiers out of there, and they disappeared. We don't know what happened to these soldiers. They took them to a UN base, so we know the UN knows what happened to these soldiers. Israel never got any information. We didn't even get bodies back. They tried to estimate, based on the amount of blood lost at the scene that we recovered from the vehicle, that it was unlikely that at least 1 or 2 of them probably didn't survive that attack. We don't even know what happened to these guys. But you know how they got kidnapped? They got kidnapped because we didn't defend the border. And so all this happened, why? Because you had these famous 3 mothers. There were 3 mothers who banded together in Tel Aviv and said, "We lost our sons in Lebanon, which is terrible, and we should unilaterally withdraw, just get our boys out of harm's way," which sounds like a great idea. Okay? But that's exactly what the prostitute in chapter 7 of Mishel is telling you. I have a mitzvah of an idea. I have a mitzvah to sell you. What I'm coming to tell you, what I'm coming to teach you, I'd like to encourage you to do, is to take this mitzvah. Forget about all the rest of them. Do what I say, because it's my personal desire. This is my agenda. Unilaterally withdraw from Lebanon. And what happened to the next soldiers that get kidnapped beyond the border, which makes it much harder to go find them? Well, they're not my son. It's not my problem. That's some other mother's problem. So then what do we have? We have another group of 4 mothers that can go back to Tel Aviv and go back and protest. Why did we unilaterally withdraw? Where are our sons? What happened to them? We don't even know. We don't even have bodies if they are, in fact, no longer with us. So these are very tough discussions to have. They're very difficult decisions to make. And halakha is not one-sided. But the more than compelling evidence seems to be in favor of the security of the entire nation versus the welfare of a small number of them, because otherwise, unfortunately, you wouldn't even have an army. What's the definition of an army, by the way, before I filled some of these questions? Some of these Libyan questions, I should add.
It was on your support.
You and him. That's okay. What is the definition of an army?
Point against you.
Wait, is an army not, in fact, a minority of a nation that fights and risks its life in order to secure, once again, the sovereignty, the freedom, liberty of the majority of the nation? Isn't there something inherent to being a soldier in a national army that implies that you're a minority accepting more risks than most other people do in order to secure them more freedoms than they currently have, or at least to take care of them and defend the ones that they currently enjoy? 1, 2, and then 3.
No, what's your middle one?
So what's the response to someone who says that there are going to be endless attacks regardless?
What's the response? Oh, and that's an argument in favor of what, Mike? There are going to be lots of attacks, so we should let them go and have more?
No,
or there are going to be lots of attacks?
You're going to continuously have to defend no matter what.
So you should make concessions or not make concessions?
So making concessions won't make a difference.
How does that statement lead you to that conclusion?
If you concede or not, you're still going to have to defend yourself militarily.
I mean, we may as well just nuke ourselves if that's the case.
Well, you're
just drop the bomb right in the center and like, let's just end it now.
No, that's not talking about
that's suicidal. You're saying, well, they're always going to be attacking us, so we may as well make all the concessions and give them all the terrorists back in order to what? Just because there are
You're not
attacks
giving them
means
weapons. You're giving them.
we're giving them human resources. You're right. What's the logic behind that? They're going to be attacking us, so we should not defend ourselves?
No, you're going to continuously defend yourself regardless.
And defending ourselves means making concessions or not?
Militarily identifying activity before they're able to do anything.
So before we take a quick intermission here, unpopular point number 2 for tonight is that
I don't necessarily. I'm just asking a question. I don't necessarily
No,
believe that they should
hear-
replace anybody, but
I hear what you're saying. Unpopular point number 2 for tonight is probably going to be that given the political climate and given the attitudes of the people who make decisions supposedly on behalf of Israel, I personally feel that even though they will promise this, because I've heard these promises before. You remember Ari Sharon said this? When Israel, once again, unilaterally withdrew from Gush Katif, what did they say? You remember these promises? This gives us military legitimacy. I was there, I heard him. Gives us military legitimacy. Now, you're going to see, up until now, they were mortars, and they were bombings, and they were stabbings, and shootings, but now that we withdrew from Gush Katif, the first time they attack us, the very first time someone fires a rocket, you remember these? I remember these discussions. The next time someone dares to do something, we're going to go in with all our military might, and we're going to prove the point that it had nothing to do with it. You're just attacking us, you want to attack us.
You didn't
And guess what?
You didn't believe it in the first place. I'm sure.
I didn't. No, I never believed. But he was a politician. No need to go there.
I was just teasing you.
So correct. So I don't think. What's your answer going to be? We should let them go and then make a military solution to the problem. But they're not going to make a military
we're
solution.
going to continue looking and having soldiers look and shoot terrorists that are in the action of fighting.
I'm with you.
But-
I'll sponsor that.
But if you're not getting anywhere with that, they're going to continue attacking you. So if you can save these kids somehow, and you're going to continue to have to fight regardless,
What does it matter if we give them more terrorists?
yeah, you have 200 million terrorists or whatever it is, and you're going to give them 1,000 more,
Well, here we have a halakhic obligation to fight them all.
right? But I'm saying you
I
also,
don't think this
that's
is
why
going
I'm
to end any
saying
other way.
you're going to look
So
at
I don't see, unfortunately, I don't see them stopping to attack us because we made concessions. In fact, I think it's only going to get worse. So what's my suggestion? My suggestion is, because it's inevitable that we're going to continue doing this, we have to take a firmer and firmer stance, because if we make too many concessions, we're going to kill ourselves before we even give them the chance. We're going to legislate ourselves out of existence by constantly giving them what they want, which, by the way, is actually the fulfillment of their greatest desires. They want to terrorize us into giving them as much as they can get, which is exactly what we're doing when we make discussions or negotiations like this. Should we continue looking for the boys? Absolutely. Should we kill everyone that we find around them? Absolutely. There's a good question to be asked whether or not we have the right to bomb a building in which they're actually being held. That's a Shimshon HaGibor question. Shlomo. Shimshon HaGibor. Right, wrong, somewhere in between. What did he do, for those of us who aren't familiar with the story?
He killed himself to kill everyone
Himself.
else.
The ballroom.
Right. Who was the people he was fighting at the time?
The finished him.
The Palestinians. And what was he? No, that's where the name comes from.
In his death, he destroyed more Plishtim
Philistine.
than his lifetime.
That's what the Tanakh tells us. He killed more people in his death than he did in his life. It was easily 3,000 or 4,000. Well, actually, what's said is that there were 2,000 on the roof, as if to say there must have been 3,000 or 4,000 inside the building. Now, do we find that he was reproached anywhere for doing what he did? Do we find any criticism of him doing what he did? Wait a second, is that not considered suicide? No one shot him? No one attacked him? In fact, what's the quote that he uses? The famous line which the Gemara uses as a it's one of these, it's not an axiom as much as it is like a halachic concept that people in certain situations will do damage in order to gain something. The expression was, this is his prayer, what he said to Hashem was, Tamot nafshi im Pelishtim. Let my soul die along with the Palestinians. Philistines, it's the same etymology. Let my soul die along with them. So here's an interesting question for you. If I'm a soldier, I'm not talking about somebody else's kid, I'm a soldier, I was drafted, okay? And I had a way of sending a signal to where it was that I was being held. If I felt that my captivity was more damaging to the nation than my death, do I in fact have the right either to kill myself and bring the house down with me, or to invite someone to detonate the entire building? Right? That's not a silly question. That's not a silly question. The United States, in dealing with negotiations and hostage situations, has shot hostages before. Right? If you're holding a hostage, and because of this hostage, you have control of the situation, I can change that. It's not a happy situation, but I can change that. They don't shoot to kill, but an injured hostage is much harder to take care of and much harder to walk with and disappear with, etc. So these are very tough situations. I'm not, claiming to have an answer to everything here and now. I would like to very strongly suggest that we all reconsider what the media are telling us to do, and what the boys' families are telling us what to do, and what the boys themselves might even tell us to do, because in a situation like this, there are quite a bit of conflicting interests, but there's an entire nation to look after. That's what we forget in situations like this. The whole nation becomes reduced to 1 or 2 or 3 people, which is horrible. That's how you make really bad decisions. The nation has to be governed as a nation. Decisions have to be made as a nation, by the nation, for the nation. And unfortunately, that's practically never the case, which is why situations like this will unfortunately continue to occur until we wisen up a bit. Take a break, have some water and some